In 1868, Elihu Burritt, American consul to Birmingham, published a book entitled The Black Country and Its Green Borderlands. He described the region as black by day and red by night, an effect produced by the hundreds of mines and ironworks that dominated the landscape. It wasn't always like that. The area was once lush and green, with steep hills and deep valleys producing a natural beauty to rival the nearby Clent Hills. But the South Staffordshire hills were made of coal, iron ore and limestone, and once their worth was realised, natural beauty quickly disappeared. But what of the area's pre-industrial history? Although there is evidence of prehistoric occupation and later of Celtic settlement during the Iron Age, the first settlers to have a lasting influence on the region were the Anglo-Saxons. They began to colonise Britain in about 450 AD, following the end of 500 years of Roman rule, landing firstly in the east and south of the country from Germany and moving further west, eventually penetrating the dense forest that clothed the Black Country, no doubt hampered by frequent confrontations with the tribes of ancient Britons they were displacing. They cleared areas of forest, and these clearings, or leas, developed into the towns that now make up the Black Country. The leader of one group of Anglo-Saxons was called Dudder and created Dudder's Lee, or Dudley. Cradder gave us Craddersley or Cradley, Cedar, Sedgley, and so on throughout the region. As well as the predominance of Anglo-Saxon place names in the Black Country, another strong reminder of its Anglo-Saxon roots remains: the local dialect. To outsiders, the Black Country speech is very distinctive, and in its strongest form, even to people from neighbouring Birmingham, can be difficult to understand. Local historians maintain that the dialect is essentially Anglo-Saxon and closer to Old English than anywhere else in the country. Older Black Country people use words like folken for folks, and for houses would say hausen, unmistakably words of Germanic origin. May Webb and Horace Philwood have lived in and around Great Bridge all their lives, and their recollections are enhanced by their rich Black Country tones.
Well, where I lived, I had nothing on the water, on the canal.
We used to go to bed with either a candle or a little Kelly lamp. You get up in the morning, you'd have all black round your mouth from the oils.
Oh, you've got to go to bed with a candle.
It's true.
And if you've got to get out in the night, if you was wanting to go on the toilet, if it was 6 foot of snow, you've got to walk through it.
Up the yard, the back of the house.
And if there was 6 in the yard, your neighbours, they had to take the turn with the washing and cleaning the toilets. Light the boil of water for your washing. Oh, yes.
After the First World War, and they walked all the way to Dudley to get some work, and when they got there, they turned the hose pipes on them. That's true.
And when it was about threepence a point. You'll go get it now. You'll go get water for that now. And what they used to do with the stamps, they says, no, I'm not pulling no leg. I've seen them go in the stamp, they put a halfpenny for the stamp, halfpenny stamp, put it in and worked it slow. And they've had about 3 stamps out of there for halfpenny.
If you left your husband in them days, you'd get nothing. And,
yep.
But if your husband left you, you could claim, but you was in and out the courts all the while, so you never used to bother.
That's it.
In them days. Now they're better looked after in that way.
After the Anglo-Saxons, the next major stage of development came following the Norman invasion, which led to the defeat of the Saxon king Harold at Hastings in 1066. William the Conqueror became King of England and divided his new kingdom up amongst his own men, who replaced the old Saxon lords. William Fitz-Ansculf became lord of many of the manors which now comprise the Black Country. The seat of his power was at Dudley Castle. The Anglo-Saxons were mainly farmers, but under the new Norman lords, trade in England began to grow, with markets developing in many towns. Another development away from traditional farming was the growth of the woolen industry in several of the towns in the region. By the 14th century, Wolverhampton was an important wool collecting centre. Here it was woven into coarse cloth for export to the continent. By now, though, the value of the riches that lay beneath the soil was being realised. There is evidence that iron ore was mined in the area as early as the 13th century, but during the 16th century, as extraction and manufacturing techniques improved, the demand for iron increased, and in the Black Country, everything needed to produce iron was present. As well as iron ore, the region was rich in limestone, which was used as a flux in the smelting process. And, close at hand, was a good supply of timber to provide the charcoal that fueled the furnaces. So, with everything readily available, the area could produce iron relatively cheaply. And in its near neighbour Birmingham, which was rapidly becoming the hardware capital of the world, the Black Country found an insatiable consumer for its product. By the late 1500s, the Earl of Dudley had founded a number of ironworks, and entrepreneurs like Richard Foley, who opened a works at Kinver in 1625, were attracted by the area's mineral wealth, obviously aware of its increasing importance. Although by now industry was firmly established, with a considerable number of people employed in ironworks and limestone mines, the industry was confined to isolated pockets amongst the still green valleys and open heathland, and farming was by far the most common occupation. But, ominously, even the farm workers were being affected by the new industry. Like magnets, irresistibly attracted by the lure of iron, they turned in increasing numbers to nail making as a means of supplementing their meagre farm income, unwittingly condemning their descendants to a miserable fate. For now, though, although the iron trade grew steadily during the 17th century, the region stayed predominantly rural. Then, in the space of 5 years, 2 developments occurred that tipped the scales massively in favour of industry, and saw the area plunge headlong into a period of destruction that made scenes like this a rare sight rather than the rule. In 1709, Dudley-born Abraham Darby found a way of turning coal into coke that would give off sufficient heat to replace charcoal as fuel for the furnaces. A few years later, Thomas Newcomen invented a steam pumping engine that would keep mines clear of water and allow coal to be mined at previously impossible depths. The first engine was installed at a pit near Dudley in 1712. Men now had the knowledge to make full use of the region's underground wealth and embarked on a period of exploitation of resources, both human and mineral, almost unparalleled in British history. The Industrial Revolution was spurred on by 2 more developments: the creation of the canal system in the late 1700s and James Watt's adaptation of the steam engine, which provided power to factories, making mass manufacturing possible and further accelerating the demand for iron. By the end of the 18th century, the fate of the area was well and truly sealed. The number of blast furnaces shot up from 14 in 1796 to 123 in 1830. These were accompanied by the many coal mines needed to provide the fuel and an increase in limestone mining to provide the flux. The new ironworks and mines needed labour, and the massive increase in industrial activity led to an explosion in the population, which rocketed from around 97,000 in 1801 to over 450,000 in 1831, with many people being lured from tied farming jobs by the promise of higher wages, only to find themselves trapped in an equally miserable existence. This description of the area by Thomas Carlyle in 1824 paints a vivid picture.
A frightful scene. A dense cloud of pestilential smoke hangs over it forever, and at night the whole region burns like a volcano, spitting fire from 1,000 tubes of brick. But oh, the wretched thousands of mortals who grind out their destiny there.
The once green and pleasant rural district was truly deserving of its new title, the Black Country. The increased population was accommodated in substandard, overcrowded conditions with little or no thought of sanitation. Another description, this one from an official report on one of the region's towns, illustrates the deplorable conditions that were common throughout the Black Country.
As the inhabitants increased in number, small rooms were raised over workshops and hovels built wherever room could be found. As soon as more land was obtained, 2 new streets were built for the working classes, 2 of the longest and most disgraceful streets in the town. None of the houses have underground drainage, and very few have any privies. There is often a common dunghill at one end, or in one corner where everything is cast.
The appalling living conditions were equalled by the working conditions. Women and children as young as 7 were extensively employed in the coalfields. And descendants of the farm workers come part-time nail makers were now desperately trying to scrape a living from nailing alone. Whole families slaved long and hard in cramped workshops behind their homes, dreadfully exploited by the ironmongers who sold them raw materials at inflated prices and bought finished nails at deflated prices. Not content with that, the ironmongers often paid the nailers with Tommy notes that could only be exchanged for goods in the ironmonger's own shop. There was no escape.
To me, ditty, I'll sing you a song, it won't take long, it is both new and pretty. 'Tis concerning Tommy shops and the high-field ruffian, for he pays you with a Tommy note, you must take that or nothing. That is of the colliers I will tell how they pays each other. Oh, little ever they but a Tommy note from a 1 week to the other. On Saturday when a week's work is done and they go to get their money, the Highfield devils learn the trick for to pay.
By 1870, the iron trade had reached a peak, and the 20th century brought a slow decline as the mineral wealth was either exhausted or too difficult to extract profitably. Closures are the main feature of the 1900s, with the last coal mine, Baggeridge Colliery near Himley, closing in 1968, marking the end of an era. Although the gradual decline inevitably brought unemployment, these were more enlightened times socially, and as the 20th century wore on, living conditions slowly improved. But 200 years of unrestrained industrialisation has taken its toll. A tour of the region tells its own story. Far more serious, though, are the problems underground. Problems no more vividly highlighted than here, in the shadow of Dudley Castle. Extensive limestone workings have created a series of uncharted underground caverns, leaving the land badly weakened. Some years ago, a small section of the sports ground collapsed. Then, in 1985, a 40-foot hole appeared in the cricket pitch. The ground has remained closed since then. These rotting spectators' benches and the overgrown football and cricket fields are like a graveyard. The hut containing the rusting turnstiles, like a tombstone. A grim reminder of the problems that also exist in many other parts of the Black Country. So far, we've been talking about the Black Country as a whole. But a closer look at the region reveals a fascinating and curious mixture of rural, urban and industrial life, apparently thrown randomly together, where it is not uncommon to see a horse grazing happily next to a factory, or houses in the shadow of a spoil heap. The Black Country is made up of towns and villages that were drawn together by industry, but each one has its own quite separate and individual identity, of which its inhabitants are fiercely protective. As we will see, an examination of these places produces some interesting and rewarding surprises. So what of the towns and villages that make up the Black Country? Dudley is to many the unofficial capital of the Black Country, crowned by the ruined castle that is visible for miles around. The castle site was occupied in Saxon times, but the ruins we see today are of Norman origin and are made up of the limestone that was mined deep inside the hill on which it stands. The town of Dudley grew up around the foot of the castle, but until the 18th century remained a relatively small settlement and seemed to gain no benefit through being the seat of the powerful Lord of Dudley. In 1585, Sir Amias Paulet wrote,
"It is one of the poorest towns that I have seen in my life."
And in 1617, the inhabitants had to petition the county for a collection for the poor. Then, further misfortune hit Dudley. By 1642, civil war was raging in England between King Charles I and Parliament. Dudley Castle became a royalist garrison, and in 1644 it came under siege from parliamentarian troops. Dudley withstood the attack and continued as an important royalist stronghold in the area, until it eventually fell to the Roundheads in 1646. Apart from mineral extraction, Dudley, unlike most Black Country towns, is not noted for any particular trade. But for more than a century, even before the zoo, it has been a tourist attraction. In the early 1900s, the 3-day Whitsuntide fete used to attract as many as 20,000 people a day to the castle and surrounding woods, many making their way by tram from Birmingham. The fetes died out after the First World War, and in 1937 the castle grounds were closed to the public when the zoo opened. The Black Country Museum, opened in 1975 on derelict land near to the castle, has further enhanced Dudley as a tourist attraction. Opposite the Black Country Museum is the Guest Hospital, which started out as 26 sandstone cottages built by the Earl of Dudley in 1849 for men blinded in his limestone mines. The men stubbornly refused the Earl's charity, and the cottages stayed empty until 1871, when trustees of Joseph Guest, a prosperous chain manufacturer and merchant, put up money to turn them into a hospital. On the other side of the castle hill are the ruins of Dudley Priory, which was founded by Gervase Pagnell, then Lord of Dudley, in about 1160 for an order of Benedictine monks. The ruins now stand in a park, which is part of the Priory housing estate, built on land bought from the Earl of Dudley in 1920 to ease the town's slum problem. Nearby is Wren's Nest Hill, which has been extensively mined for limestone. The entrances to the mines have been sealed, and the Wrenner, as it is called locally, is now a nature and geological reserve, which provides an amazing contrast to the housing estate and bustling town below. Near to Dudley is Netherton, where St Andrew's Church lays claim to being the highest parish church in the country. The church is built on the site of an ancient Celtic Iron Age fort, and the view from the churchyard into the Blackbrook Valley is probably as dramatic as the one the ancient Britons looked over. The canal, though, is a more recent addition. The other side of the churchyard looks over Netherton Reservoir, with Saltwell's Nature Reserve beyond. A remarkable example of what nature can achieve when left to its own devices. The area was once heavily mined, and when mining ceased, all that was left was a wasteland of spoil heaps, open shafts, and disused quarries. In the 1980s, reclamation took place to make the area safe, and nature has done the rest, with quite dramatic results. At their most spectacular, here at Dalton's Clay Pit at the heart of the reserve. Compared with ancient villages like Netherton, West Bromwich is a new town. The old settlement of Broomwich, mentioned in Domesday, was situated a few miles away, around the parish church of All Saints and the old manor house. Early in the 19th century, coal and ironstone were discovered on heathland to the southeast of the old village, and a new town grew around the mines that sprung up there. By 1901, the population of West Bromwich had grown to 65,000. The main road through the town formed part of the stagecoach route from London to Holyhead, and confirmed West Bromwich's importance as an industrial town. The mines that were responsible for the new town's existence have now gone, and the centre today is circled by the obligatory ring road and is occupied by a large shopping centre and a pedestrianised section of the high street. On an island at one end of the high street is a stone archway, a remnant from Sandwell Hall, which once stood in Sandwell Park, a short distance from the modern town. The park today provides a peaceful contrast to the roar of the traffic on the ring road for West Bromwich inhabitants to enjoy. Another survivor of the area's pre-industrial days is the restored 17th century oak house, which once lay in countryside on the edge of Bromwich Heath. Now it is surrounded by the houses that spread out from the town centre. One junction along the motorway brings us to Oldbury. To many people, Oldbury is just a traffic island near the M5, or a hypermarket with the rest of it swallowed up by industry. But in the old village is a little piece of history. Here is the first ever branch of Lloyd's Bank, opened in 1864. Like most Black Country towns, Oldbury has its fair share of pubs, all with a friendly welcome. Well, nearly all. Near to Oldbury, a piece of pre-industrial Black Country survives. On Portway Hill in Rowley Regis, this medieval farm still operates as a small holding, overlooking the industrial desert below. The farm itself is also overlooked by Turner's Hill, topped by a water tower, and the view from here is quite spectacular, with Dudley Castle visible in the distance. From the other side of the hill, the view is equally spectacular, but completely different, since the discovery in the late 19th century of Rowley Rag, a hard stone valuable in road making, a huge chasm has been gouged out of the hillside, transforming the landscape. Further south is Halesowen, which is on the edge of the Black Country and is one of the more rural towns in the region. At the time of Doomsday, it was called Halle, from the Saxon word hal, meaning remote valley. The addition of Owen came in 1177, when Henry II granted it to David Owen, Prince of Wales. The town is built on the banks of the River Stour, but the river, that was probably the very reason for Halesowen's existence, now passes almost unnoticed through a series of culverts, at times reduced to a trickle. A closer look at the old bridge at Great Cornbow provides one of the few clues to its former size and importance. The town centre is dominated by the Church of St John the Baptist, built in 1083 on the site of a Saxon church by Roger de Montgomery, who it is thought fought for William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings, and was rewarded with a number of manors, amongst them Hail Zoin. The ancient cross outside the church used to stand in Great Cornbow until it was blown down by a gale in 1908. The old High Street is still the town's main shopping area, and some of the older buildings and shops and the pedestrianisation of the central area have contrived to produce a pleasant village atmosphere. An atmosphere that makes the modern spires of the Cornbow Centre seem strangely out of place, particularly when seen with the old church spire behind. In sharp contrast to the Cornbow Centre, just off High Street near to the church are the White Friars Cottages. Built around 1325 and marvellously preserved, they provide a glimpse of the medieval village. Standing here at the foot of Church Lane, it is easy to forget that Hail Zoin was an early centre of heavy industry. But you don't have to go far to be reminded. Coal was mined here from the early 1300s until the Coombswood pit closed in 1948. The site is also occupied by the Tube Works, which started in 1860 and is now part of British Steel. Here too is a perfect example of the peculiarities of the Black Country. Across the road is a country village pub. The Bell and Bear is a 400-year-old farmhouse that was converted to an inn about 100 years ago to provide refreshments to horses and riders struggling up the hill. Next to Hail Zoin, along the Stour Valley, is Cradley. The story of Cradley's development is typical of many Black Country towns. About 1300 years ago, an Anglo-Saxon named Cradder led his small group of people up the Stour Valley and settled on its southern slopes overlooking the river. The camp was called Cradder's Clearing, or Cradderley. Descendants of those early pioneers farmed the land for 800 years until industry started to take over. There was a forge at Cradley by the early 1600s, and by the mid-1700s, as the Industrial Revolution took hold, the town began to grow, and small settlements started to appear on the heath on the opposite side of the river, attracted by the industry. The new arrivals took up various trades, but specialised in chain making. Gradually, the shanty towns merged together to form Cradley Heath, a name that became synonymous with chains. The tiny hamlet of Mushroom Green survives as a reminder of Cradley Heath's early origins. Now a sought-after residential area, these cottages, some more than 200 years old, once housed a chain-making community, where men, women and often children toiled in chain shops for up to 12 hours a day to earn a pittance. This old mushroom green chain shop has been restored and keeps alive the traditional chain making methods. The cottage attached is typical of a 19th century chain maker's families, one up, one down accommodation. Chains are still a part of everyday life here. The Griff Chain Works was established in 1835 and still produces chains commercially, although the methods are a little more modern. Further still along the Stour Valley lies Stourbridge. There is no mention of Stourbridge in the Domesday Survey. It emerged later as a market near to the river crossing, or swine ford, inside the manor of Old Swinford, which has long since been swallowed up by the child it spawned. The swine ford, through which farmers used to drive their pigs to market, was here. As the market grew in importance, a bridge was built. The Stour Bridge gave the market town its name, and thousands of drivers each day now cross the river in the same place as those early farmers. The High Street ran up from the bridge into the town, but is now dissected by the ring road that encircles the town like a moat. The Crown Centre provides a modern focal point in the town, but the rest of it remains much as it was, and its narrow streets retain a market town atmosphere. The 17th century Talbot Hotel is the oldest building in Stourbridge, although its frontage was renewed in the 18th century. Stourbridge was caught up in the Black Country's industrial development and has its share of remnants of working-class housing and old workshops, but it is glassmaking for which the area became famous. Glassmaking came to Stourbridge in the second half of the 16th century, brought by Protestant refugees from Lorraine in France, who were attracted by the deposits of high-quality fire clay needed to produce fine glass. By 1620, the industry became centred around Wordsley and Brierley Hill. Nearly 400 years later, the area is still producing fine-quality cut glass crystal. The Royal Brierley Crystal Works produce high-quality, full-lead crystal gift and tableware by methods almost unchanged from the ones introduced by those early refugees. The company was founded in 1776, and generation after generation of local people employed here have developed the high degree of skill required to maintain the standards that earned the royal warrant granted by King George in 1919. Brierley Hill, until quite recently, was also known for another type of industry. Iron and steel production began in Brierley Hill shortly after the opening of the canal in 1779, when Benjamin Gibbons created rolling mills and furnaces, fuelled by the open-cast coal mines that once operated where Withymoor village now stands. William, the 11th Baron of Dudley, took over the ironworks in 1843. And in 1857, the Round Oak Works opened, adjacent to the old furnaces. And for the next 125 years, generations of local men earned their living at the Earls, as it was known. At its peak, 3,500 people were employed there. After a great deal of speculation and debate, the Round Oak Works finally closed in 1982. Creating mass unemployment in Brierley Hill and marking the end of the town's association with heavy industry. The site of the works is being developed as a business complex, and part of it is occupied by the giant Merry Hill shopping centre. Moving north, we come to Wolverhampton. Many inhabitants of Wolverhampton disclaim membership of the Black Country, so we won't do it. Hang on though, Wolverhampton is in the Black Country after all, so here we go. By 850 AD, the town was an Anglo-Saxon religious centre and gets its name from Lady Wulfruna, who in 985 AD was granted land in Heanton, or Hightown, by King Ethelred. Wulfruna dedicated this land to the church and it became known as Wulfruna's Heanton, a bit of a mouthful, that over the years was corrupted to Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton became important in the wool trade during the 14th and 15th centuries and contained many wealthy merchants who built impressive houses in the town. As the metal trades established themselves, Wolverhampton embarked on a new age of prosperity. But the wealth was confined to a few who, as the grime of industry took hold, moved out of town to the cleaner air of areas like Tettenhall and Compton, leaving the old areas to the working classes. Slums and squalor were commonplace. Sanitation was poor and cholera was an all too frequent visitor. In 1849, an asylum was established for the many children orphaned by the plague. The building today is still used by children, but now in happier circumstances. It is the Royal Wolverhampton School in Penn Road. Wolverhampton is still a place of sharp contrast between the social classes, but thankfully the slums have long since been cleared, apart from the odd glimpse of unhappier times. The town centre today is busy and bustling, with much of the activity going on in and around the modern, bright and well-planned Mander shopping centre, which is built on the site of the old Wolverhampton Grammar School, and the paint and varnish factory founded in the late 1700s by Charles Mander. A short distance away, and in contrast to the modern Mander Centre, is King Street, where the traditional shops and cafes create a delightful old world atmosphere. Finally, to Wolverhampton's crowning glory. St Peter's Church stands on the land given by Lady Wulfruna more than 1,000 years ago. This ancient cross is all that remains from Anglo-Saxon times, but the church, set in immaculate gardens, is one of the most awe-inspiring structures in the region. Now to Willenhall. A large part of Willenhall, it seems, is about to fall down. In the old marketplace, traditional shops like this are not out of place, and even the modernised shop fronts scarcely disguise the fact that the buildings belong in another age. When looking at sites like this, it comes as some surprise to learn that Willenhall is the centre of a multi-million-pound industry. But if you look at your front door, the chances are that the lock was made here. This is the home of lockmaking, where many of the world leaders in the lock trade are based. The trade began here in the 1500s and quickly established itself as a cottage industry, requiring a high degree of skill as all of the lock components were filed by hand. The locksmiths spent long hours bent over their workbenches and earned Willenhall the nickname Umpshire because of the large number of hump-backed lockmakers around. It is said that local pubs had holes cut into the wall behind the seats to accommodate the lockmakers' humps. As a measure of the reputation Willenhall earned for itself, when American Linus Yale invented his pin tumbler lock, it was to this little Staffordshire town that he came in 1929 to begin mass production. Willenhall today accounts for 90% of the locks made in this country, and although most are mass-produced, there are still many small locksmiths in the town, keeping alive the traditional methods. Companies like this one, started by Arthur Lewis in 1920 and carried on by his sons Cyril and Arthur, and then by his grandsons Granville and Terry. Terry's son James represents the fourth generation in the family business. The Lewises carry on lockmaking the traditional way, in a traditional workshop that was originally a pub brew house. Over the road is another bit of Willenhall history. In 1849, a cholera outbreak caused overcrowding in the churchyard, and 211 victims were buried here on a piece of land once owned by Dr. Richard Wilkes, and now known as Doctor's Piece. Wednesbury, or Wedgbury as the locals pronounce it, is an ancient settlement and gets its name from the Saxon god Woden. The hill from which the medieval church of St Bartholomew overlooks the town has seen a great deal of activity going back nearly 2,500 years. The Celtic people who occupied Britain from around 500 BC built a fortress here, and centuries later, in 916 AD, after the Anglo-Saxons had taken over, Princess Ethelfleda of Mercia, daughter of King Alfred, made this her fighting platform when she fortified Wednesbury against the Danes. A short distance down the hill, behind the church, is another little piece of history. Tucked away amongst the modern houses, frozen in time, is Ye Old Leathern Bottle. Built in 1510, it was a coaching inn on the main route to Walsall, and is said to have been frequented by Dick Turpin. Now to Walsall. The 13th century St Matthew's Church looks down on Walsall town centre from the top of a 500-foot limestone hill. The church hill formed the centre of the medieval town, and until as recently as the early 20th century, hundreds of people lived in cramped old houses that clustered around the church. The houses have mostly been cleared and the area landscaped, providing a peaceful retreat from the bustle below. The High Street was the medieval main street, which stretches down from the church to an area at the centre of town called the Bridge, that today bears no resemblance to a bridge at all. But in the 14th century, a footbridge spanned a brook that separated High Street from Park Street. When the brook was in flood, people paid a penny to be carried across on horseback. The waterway was covered over in about 1856, and now people rely on electronic means to cross the street. Iron, limestone and coal were quarried in the Walsall area, and in 1824 the Mayor of Walsall drowned while swimming in a flooded derelict quarry. 50 years later, Walsall Arboretum was created on the site and remains a popular attraction for locals and visitors alike. As well as quarrying, Walsall became well known for making horses' bridle hardware, spurs and stirrups. This led to the trade for which Walsall is famous. As a natural progression from the hardware, the artisans began making the saddles and very quickly established themselves as leaders in the field. During the 19th century, Walsall produced more saddlery items than anywhere in the world, and although since cars took over from horses as the favoured means of travel, the trade has declined, Walsall is still very much the leather goods centre of Britain, with more than 100 leather firms employing around 3,000 people, many the fourth and fifth generation of families to be involved in the leather trade. It is this resource of people with unique inherited skills, unequalled anywhere in the country, that should ensure the survival of a trade that has become part of Walsall's heritage. The town now produces all manner of leather goods, from belts and purses to bags and suitcases. But it is saddle making that best utilises the skills developed over more than 2 centuries. Skills that are very much in evidence at companies like Albion Saddle Makers to produce some of the finest saddles in the world. Here everything is handmade and individually tailored to suit both horse and rider. From the skeleton of the saddle or the tree to the finished saddle, skillfully constructed by the saddle makers, drawing on a wealth of experience. Over 20 countries buy saddles from this one company alone in the heart of Walsall. The last town on our tour is Tipton, birthplace of William Perry, the famous Tipton slasher, the bare-knuckle fighter whose headquarters were at the Fountain Inn on the corner of Factory Road, and who in 1850 became champion prize fighter of England. Perry learnt his trade working on the narrowboats, fighting other boatmen to be first through the locks on the canals that were so prolific in Tipton that it was called the Venice of the Midlands. Although canals are the only similarity with Venice Tipton can claim, the town has played a major role in increasing the interest in the Black Country's heritage. It was here in 1966 that John Brimble and Dr. Fletcher had the idea of forming a Black Country Society. The society today boasts nearly 2,000 members and produces a quarterly magazine, The Black Country Man, which to anyone connected with the region is of enormous interest. The Black Country Society and other organisations do much to preserve the area's heritage. But what of the future? No one can deny that the problems facing the Black Country are immense and that recovery will be a long, slow process. But it has begun. It was mining that quite literally fueled industrialisation in the region, and ironically, it is the old mining areas that give some cause for optimism. As we saw at Baggeridge and Saltwells, nature, with a little help and given time, can redress the balance. As for the problems underground and the fragmented, derelict sites that litter the Black Country, these will require a little more effort from man and a great deal of money. But at least the situation is being addressed. In 1987, the government set up the Black Country Development Corporation and made available £200 million to assist with the land reclamation and the economic and environmental regeneration of the worst districts. Working with Walsall, Sandwell and Wolverhampton Metropolitan Councils, many acres of land have been reclaimed and made usable again, and some success has been gained in attracting foreign businesses to set up in the Black Country. Dudley Council have plans to make safe the old sports ground and develop a business and leisure park on the site. Dudley is also the focal point of the Black Country's developing tourist industry, and the emergence of the Leather Museum in Walsall, the Lock Museum at Willenhall and Wordsley's Glass Museum indicate the increasing importance of tourism to the region, and anything that brings in money and generates jobs is to be welcomed. But, to quote the late Harold Parsons from his book Portrait of the Black Country, there must surely be an inherent danger in living off the past. There may also be a risk that any improvements become cosmetic and for the benefit of tourists, rather than the people to whom the Black Country belongs. Finally, Finally, we return to Tipton, where the size of the task facing the authorities is no more obvious. At the centre of the Black Country and far from its green borderlands, in the area from here to Great Bridge and towards Wednesbury, the extent of the dereliction is alarming. Almost every square foot, it seems, was taken over by factories or the homes of the people that worked in them. The factories have gone, leaving the people to ponder just what went wrong. Here, though, there is a ray of hope. The authorities have faced up to the problems. Improvement work has begun, and nature is desperately trying to salvage something. To turn this into a decent place to live and work will require a massive effort and sustained commitment. If the struggle of our forebears is not to be in vain, it must be done.
Well, you know, make us all that day remember well the last strike of which this tale I do tell. Mom cold and hungry with that heavy day to Bromsgrove town did it take our toilsome way. In these Nile forges miserable souls, they'll not forget the givers of the cause. Nile masters are hard-hearted and piles, and the way we took was 13 miles. Well, be slaves abroad in the sugar cane, they have plenty to help I and pity their pain. But the slaves at home in the mine and fire, they have plenty to pity, but none to admire. Well, I wish I could see old Nail Daler, just a-drawing such a load as did we poor nailers, mightn't say such punishment and such smart, that it might soften their heart's stony heart. And so as the nailers do suffer such smart, well, I hopes it will soften old Pharaoh's heart. My, and let each nailer tell to his son the labours that we for a right soft dog.